Nashville kicks off a 5-game homestand, and these next 5 games may be the most important this team plays all season.
Your Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast, and thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are your free daily Nashville Predators podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, want to kick off this episode with a shout out to our great listeners, our Locked On Pred heads, who tune in every day to talk about Nashville Predators hockey and everything that goes along with that. We love that we get to spend a little bit of your day with you. We thank you so much for your support. I'm Ann Kimmel. I am a writer at the Hockey News. I'm usually joined by my partner in crime, Nick Morgan. Nick is going to be back next week with me. We have so much that we need to talk about on today's episode. Of course, tonight, the Nashville Predators return home after a record-setting 5-game road trip win streak. Now they have to replicate the success at home. On today's show, we are going to preview tonight's game against the Ottawa Senators. We're also going to dive into why the Preds may have struggled so much on home ice this season. And we have got to talk about Juuse Saros' future. We're going to do all of that coming up in just a minute. First, want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. We're going to kick off this episode with a story that just dropped this morning from Frank Saravelli at the Daily Faceoff. And this story subtly reveals just how important this 5-game homestand is going to be for the Nashville Predators. According to Saravelli's sources, he says that Juuse Saros is unlikely to be traded while the Predators are in a playoff spot. Nashville has 5 games until the trade deadline, March 8th. All of those are home games, and we're going to talk about why that matters coming up later in the show. Frank Saravelli, in his article, talked about the teams with the biggest needs in net. He also talked about the goaltenders who have the most appeal and who will garner the highest cost. So let's dive into what he talked about and how this relates to Juuse Saros and these next 5 Predators games. Of course, when you're talking about a top team looking for a goaltender, really needing a goaltender, this is a team we've talked about on the show before. We're talking about the New Jersey Devils. They are going to finish probably near the bottom of the league when it comes to combined save percentage from their goaltenders. So this is a huge need for the New Jersey Devils. We have talked before that Barry Trotz revealed in an interview on 102.5 that he and Tom Fitzgerald talk a lot. Saros has been mentioned in passing, talked about a deal in Juuse Saros with the New Jersey Devils. But Barry Trotz has been very upfront. If you want Juuse Saros, you are going to have to knock my socks off. That's going to be the kind of deal it's going to take for Barry Trotz. We have speculated a little bit about what that might be from New Jersey Devils. And I will tell you just personally, as a non-general manager, but somebody who wishes they had a vote, for me, it would need to include a player like Dawson Mercer. If the New Jersey Devils want to pry Juuse Saros out of my cold dead hands, they're going to have to give me somebody like Dawson Mercer in exchange. Mercer is a 22-year-old center. He was a 2020 first-round pick for the New Jersey Devils. This season, he's played 58 games, 15 goals, 26 points. Not his best statistically, a little bit of a step down from last season where he was a knock your socks off kind of performer. Played all 82 games last season, 27 goals, 56 points. Now, I think we have to ask the question, would New Jersey make a deal that would include Dawson Mercer to try to get Juuse Saros? I don't know. Dawson Mercer cost the New Jersey Devils a lot. They traded Taylor Hall to get the pick for Mercer. And I also think New Jersey has to figure out, and I can't really tell this, I don't know what Tom Fitzgerald thinks, but Is New Jersey a right now contending team? Or are they a team that's just close, but they need a couple of more pieces? Does Tom Fitzgerald really think, hey, if we had a goaltender, we could be deep into a cup run? I don't know. Dawson Mercer is a player they may not want to part with if they feel like, this is our window. We're just missing one piece. They may not be willing to give up a player like Dawson Mercer, who is young, who's got some time where he can continue to grow into a bigger role for them. He is a really intriguing player to me. He's very fast. He's got great finishing skills. I think he would fit in really well with the style of play that Andrew Brunette wants to do and what Barry Trotz is going to try to build a roster for going ahead. But I also think you want Juuse Saros, you're going to have to give me Dawson Mercer, some picks, maybe a high prospect, and you're going to have to do it with a smile because Juuse Saros, that's a lot to give up. And Frank Saravelli agrees with me. He ranked the goaltenders as far as like, what is their value in a trade? And he ranks Juuse Saros as super premium, like the best gas that's really expensive. And so what that really means is that it is going to have to be a big deal to get Juuse Saros away from the Nashville Predators. Saros ranks higher, according to Saravelli, than many of the other names you're hearing on the market, like Jacob Markstrom, Charlie Lindgren, Jake Allen, Anton Forsberg. Saros is just the guy. He's the elite level goaltender that is whispered about on the market. Now, say what you want about Juuse Saros' stats and his up and down season, some inconsistency this season. Saros is a big picture, long-term goaltender that any team would want. And here's the thing, Nashville, I think, is a little bit spoiled. Yes, it is appealing to talk about trading Juuse Saros because you can get a big piece in return. But Nashville hasn't played a lot of hockey in recent years where they haven't had an exceptional game-stealing goaltender in net. And I don't know that the Predators fans remember or realize how different it's going to be without a Pekka Rinne, without a Juuse Saros in net, who, no matter how the team plays in front, there's a little bit of an ace up your sleeve. Bringing up Yaroslav Askarov, I get that people say bring him up, put him in the NHL level, but I hope that people understand and could accept, if that's the route the Predators go, what a step back that is going to be for this franchise. Not because Yaroslav Askarov is not an NHL caliber goaltender. He's going to grow into that. I don't know what that's going to look like because he's his own man. He does his own thing in net. But I think because Nashville has had for so long this almost subconscious understanding that there's a goaltender that's going to bail you out. And when you put somebody like Yaroslav Askarov in net in his first couple of seasons, the expectation can't be that he's going to be that for the Predators. So I think it's an interesting conversation. Again, so much talk about Saros and trade. And of course, we're going to keep on top of that as the trade deadline gets closer and closer. But I think the bottom line and what Frank Saravelli's article really emphasizes is that if Nashville is in a playoff position, Juuse Saros is not going anywhere. And what that means is these next 5 games at home are going to be critical for the Predators. They've got to get those wins. And let's just be real. It has not always been easy for this team to get wins at home. Predators are 14-15 at home, which, friends, that is not the record Barry Trotz or Andrew Brunette want at Bridgestone Arena. It's not the record that Nashville Predators fans want at Bridgestone Arena either. At morning skate this morning, got a chance to talk to some of the players and to hear from Andrew Brunette about playing at home versus playing on the road. Coming up, I'm going to share what they talked about and give you one really interesting tidbit that Andrew Brunette shared that I thought was very, very interesting. We're going to talk about what he had to say coming up in just a minute. First, want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Regardless of where the Nashville Predators are in the current standings, I want to remind you that you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper. It's the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether players like Philip Forsberg, Ryan O'Reilly, or Thomas Chabot will record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in any given game. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You could win 100 times your money. That's right, playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you're going to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availabilities. So tonight, Nashville Predators are kicking off a 5-game homestand against the Ottawa Senators. On tomorrow's show, we're going to recap whatever we see happening on the ice tonight at Bridgestone Arena, including my one word to describe the game. I am also going to be looking for your one words. So be sure that you are following the podcast on Twitter at LO_Predators so you can share your one word after tonight's game. Maybe we'll talk about it on tomorrow's show. Nashville Predators back from a very successful 5-game road win. Now we're looking at a 5-game homestand, and this could be a little bit tricky. And I really wanted to start looking at some of the statistics and kind of getting to the bottom of why. Like, what is the hitch in the giddy up when it comes to home wins at Bridgestone Arena? It's something a little bit different for Predators fans. Bridgestone has kind of been a little bit of a sacred space for the Nashville Predators in recent seasons, where if you come in here, you're going to have to fight to get the win. Hasn't really been like that this season. Because I love you all so much, I spent the weekend creating an Excel spreadsheet, which is a big deal because I do believe that Excel is a tool of the devil. But I did it for you all to look at the numbers from this season. So I went and inputted every game that the Predators have played, including home and away, whether it was a win or a loss, recorded goals for, goals against. And then what I did is I divided Nashville's opponents into 3 buckets. One bucket was, hey, this is a playoff contention team. This is a team that's in the playoffs. They're relatively serious contender. Another bucket was what I like to call the borderline teams. These are the teams that, like, you know what, they could make a run. They're hovering around that wild card position. I'm not sure that they're like a top team predicted to win the Stanley Cup, but they're serious. And then the third bucket are those teams that are out. Bless their hearts. I'm talking about like you, Chicago Blackhawks and San Jose Sharks. We love you, but you know who you are. So I kind of divided the opponents up like that and really wanted to take a look at what do I see when I'm looking at home wins, away wins, scoring, opponents. What can we figure out is going on this season? There were some interesting stats. So follow along with me if you can. I'm going to summarize them without the numbers because I'm better that way myself. But some things that I noticed of note. Teams that Nashville lost to at home, who are those playoff or borderline teams, so better teams of the league, those teams at Bridgestone Arena outscored the Predators 5.07 goals to 2.15 goals. Now, if you want to get the bell curve a little bit neater and kick out that 9-2 Dallas loss, I did that for you. And that comparison is 4.75 goals to Nashville's 2.16 goals. When Nashville beats a playoff or a borderline team on the road, Nashville averages 1 full goal more than when they win against those playoff or borderline teams at home. So they are scoring 1 full goal more on average on the road in wins against good teams than they are in wins at home against the good teams. And then Nashville has played more playoff caliber borderline teams at home than they have on the road so far. So those were things that kind of jumped out to me, some numbers. And here's kind of what I take away from that. When Nashville loses at home to good teams, they lose big. Nashville gives up a lot more goals in losses at home than they do on the road. Now, Nashville scores more in wins on the road against good teams than they do at home. I think that's interesting. They score more on the road. And here's something that I think we have generally overlooked in this whole home record conversation, and that is that Nashville has had a more challenging home schedule. They have played better teams at Bridgestone Arena than they have on the road. So, we always talk about the advantage of home ice. Of course, we're talking about things like the atmosphere, the energy, the noise level. Of course, talking about having last change, talking about having your fans there. So, what in the ever loving flagnog, my friends, has been the problem at times at Bridgestone Arena? Sat down and talked with a couple of players about that. And Andrew Brunette addressed it this morning at Morning Skate as well. Cody Glass talked about the fact he thinks there is just a mental component with it. And I think it's interesting when you talk about home ice advantage and the dynamic between the crowd and the players, because it can kind of become a chicken and the egg argument. And you can say, hey, the crowd really needs to get into it because that spurs on the players to perform better. And we've seen that. That's very, very true. The flip side of that is you can say, hey, this crowd is really going to get into it when the players on the ice make a big play, make a big hit, create an amazing chance. We get a big save from Juuse Saros. So you kind of get into this chicken or the egg. What do you need first? Do you need the crowd to get into it, or do the players need to play really well and get the crowd into it? All of that aside, what we know is that there has to be some sort of, as they say in Star Wars, a symbiotic relationship between the crowd at home and what the team is doing on the ice. And at times, both of those things have been off. A couple of things that have happened on the ice that I think have been tough to get the crowd into the game. Nashville has given up early goals at home. Now, they've done that, all of these things a little bit on the road, but we've seen this at home. And when you give up an early goal in a game, a la Dallas Stars, like 30 seconds into the game, it kind of sucks the wind out of the room and it gets a little bit harder to get the team or get the crowd back into it. Nashville also has had a habit of giving up quick consecutive goals to opponents at home. And when you look back through some of the home losses, you'll see more than a handful of them had stretches where, like, under 3 minutes, opponents have scored 2 goals in under 3 minutes. That is another thing that just sucks wind right out of a room. And finally, Nashville gives up goals late in periods, which I have to tell you is probably one of my biggest pet peeves. Play the full 20 minutes for the love. And when you do that, again, it lets a little air out of the balloon and you have to wait 20 minutes to do something to get the crowd back into it. Andrew Brunette talked about it today after Morning Skate, talked about, there is a mental component to playing at home that is a little bit different than playing on the road. He said, there may be a little bit more pressure, especially for younger players who really want to perform well at home, who want the crowd to appreciate them in their performance. Maybe veterans kind of understand the bigger picture a little bit more than some of the young players. But one thing that Andrew Brunette said, and I thought this was so interesting and revealing and made me appreciate just how authentic and honest Brunette is about self-evaluation as a coach, is he said he feels like he is partly to blame for Nashville's poor home record. Now, they're 14-15. They're not absolute trash at home, but this is not the record that you want. Brunette says he is partly to blame. And he said he so wants Bridgestone Arena to be a hard place to play in that maybe subconsciously talking about that subconsciously became the emphasis for the players instead of focusing on the identity and the style of play that the Predators need to execute that ultimately results in Bridgestone Arena being a tough place to play, where maybe the focus isn't on the process, it's on the end result. And he said, we've talked about it. This has to be a hard place to come in and win. Well, really, it's got to be a place where the Nashville Predators execute good hockey. and it will become a hard place to win. And that's something, look, Barry Trotz and Andrew Brunette, that's really a part of this new Nashville Predators reset that they're rebuilding. When they talk about building culture, it is about making Bridgestone a tough place to play. And that is a big part of it. But you really have to focus on the process and not the result that you want. And I thought that was really interesting of Andrew Brunette to kind of take a little bit of responsibility for the way the message was received. Regardless of how he meant for it to be delivered, I think he wanted to take responsibility for, maybe the way that I sent the message took focus away from what really it needed to be on. Here's what we know. These next 5 games at home are going to be critical, especially leading up to this trade deadline. It's going to decide the roster for the Nashville Predators. It's going to decide what happens with these UFAs on the roster. And it's also going to make or break Nashville's postseason chances. And it is an interesting combination of 5 home games. You have Ottawa tonight, Minnesota, Colorado, then you have Montreal and Buffalo. Now, you can't focus on Minnesota and Colorado yet, even though, look, these are 2 teams, obviously Colorado in the playoffs, Minnesota still wanting to get back into the wild card conversation, but you've got to take it one game at a time. You also can't get through Ottawa, Minnesota, and Colorado and then go, got through those games against, Ottawa and then 2 good playoff teams. Now we just have to get through Montreal and Buffalo. No big deal. You've got to stay focused game by game. We're going to do that coming up. We're going to focus on tonight's game against the Ottawa Senators. I'm going to share with you my players to watch. And I'm also going to tell you why this could be a tougher game than Ottawa's record indicates. We're going to talk about that coming up here in just one moment. First, want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by our great friends at Camino Consulting. So you have heard of Camino Consulting's online families and couples course. Hopefully you've taken advantage of the Locked On 25% off discount running till the end of the month. But what about their live seminars? In both sports and business, the challenge in differentiating candidates and recruits is an endless battle. Everyone can demonstrate their measurables and qualifications, but we all know that it's the intangibles that matter when those things are so similar. So contact Camino Consulting for their team and management seminars to get a peek behind the curtain and watch your next recruiting class or hiring group become one of the most effective you've ever seen. Both because you've identified the right candidates and because you've learned how to communicate and motivate them in accordance with their own preferences. But you aren't in business management or working with a team, Camino Consulting pays referrals. You can make some money making your workplace and favorite teams better. Every group works together better at the end of year 1 than week 1. So contact Camino Consulting at caminoconsulting.ca and get on the fast track to understanding. Again, that is caminoconsulting.ca. Big games for the Nashville Predators in this 5-game homestand before the deadline. We're going to be reviewing and recapping each one of these games. And of course, we are going to be keeping on top of any moves that happen with the Predators and across the league with this trade deadline looming as well. Tonight, Ottawa Senators are coming to town. They have a 25-28-3 record. They are not the bottom of the Atlantic Division. They're 1 point ahead of Montreal there. So definitely not the season I think Ottawa hoped to have. I'm not going to lie. I was thinking about this. I think I might have had Ottawa as a sleeper pick at the beginning of the season, but I'm going to need you guys to love me through that. But don't be fooled. Let's not be fooled by their record. This month alone, Ottawa has wins against Toronto, Tampa Bay, Dallas. They played one of their best games against Dallas in a 4-1 win. They have a shootout win over Las Vegas. And they had a very close overtime loss to the Florida Panthers. So it's not a team to be trifled with. And look, this is something the Nashville Predators should know better than anyone. Predators were up 3-0 in their last game against the Ottawa Senators on January 29th before the Senators came roaring back to win it in overtime. In that game, the Preds had goals from McCarron, Tomasino, and Trennan. And then Drake Batherson got a goal for the Senators after winning a board battle. Tim Stützle scored on a turnover that created a rush chance. And then Brady Tkachuk scored off of a face-off win. In overtime, Nashville couldn't capitalize on a 2-on-none chance. The Senators turned right around, brought the puck down, and Claude Giroux scored that game winner. It was a little bit of a tough overtime loss. In games where the Ottawa Senators are winning against playoff caliber teams, they're doing three things very well. They are playing a physical game, they are forechecking and winning puck battles, and they are blocking shots. They block a lot of shots. So when it comes to this game tonight, who is my player to watch for the Ottawa Senators? I'm going with Thomas Chabot. This is their 27-year-old defenseman, younger player. He is playing a lot of ice time for Ottawa right now. He's playing like Roman Yossi ice time right now. But he is a defenseman playing very well defensively, but he is also generating a lot of offense, a la Roman Yossi. He has only played 34 games so far this season because he has had some injuries at different times, but he's really having a good little streak here. He has 3 goals and 5 points in his last 4 games, playing very, very well and creating chances for other players as well as finishing on his own chances. So Thomas Chabot is somebody to keep your eye on tonight that the Predators are going to need to be mindful of. Goaltending tonight, going to be a little bit of a question for Ottawa. It's going to be interesting to see who they go with. They played last night. This is their second game of a back-to-back. They lost last night 6-3 on the road against the Washington Capitals. Anton Forsberg started the game, but was pulled after giving up 4 goals on 10 shots. Juuse Saros came in and he gave up 2 goals on 10 shots. So it'll be interesting to see whether they go ahead and put Forsberg back in net tonight or whether they let Korpisalo get the start tonight. I think that's probably what they had originally intended before Korpisalo had to go into last night's game. So let's see what they do in net tonight. They did not play particularly well against Washington, so they're going to be coming into Bridgestone looking for a bounce-back game against the Predators. And here's what's real. Nashville cannot take this game for granted. And it could be a tricky game for the Nashville Predators tonight for a couple of reasons. Number one, that loss against Dallas may not feel as fresh to the Predators right now as it did when they left and went out on this road trip. The team knew that they were on the verge of losing everything after that Dallas loss and going into this road trip. They knew they were probably going to lose a shot at the playoffs. They were probably going to lose some teammates at the trade deadline, but now they're in a different place. They're in a wild card spot, but you can't allow that to give a mindset change. Don't let the quote unquote security of the standings make you think you play any differently. So you have to be aware of that. I think you also have to factor in the fact that Nashville's coming home from being on the West Coast time. So there is a time change. Now, they had yesterday off, and I know a lot of them mentioned in passing that they spent some time sleeping, catching up on sleep yesterday. But there is a little bit of a time change that you have to kind of factor in when you are doing your meal prep on game day, when you're getting your game day nap. How much of that is still going to be affected by having been on West Coast time? They also are coming into tonight's game having played 4 games in 6 days on the road. So that's a lot of compacted hockey with travel at the end. So, there are some things that Nashville's going to have to push through to really get a good game tonight at home. But there are some keys to success that the Predators need to focus on. I think we can all agree we have loved the depth scoring we've seen from the Predators on this road trip. And they got that in the first game against Ottawa, but they just couldn't finish. Tonight, what I would love to see is top line scoring at 5-on-5. I feel like I'm harping on this a lot, but I really want to see that top line scoring at 5-on-5. They only had 1 goal at 5-on-5 with the top line that whole road trip, and that was against Anaheim. Something of note, Philip Forsberg was not at morning skate this morning. We did ask Andrew Brunette about his status for tonight. Brunette said he would be in the lineup. Just something to keep in mind. Dennis Garyanov did line rushes with Ryan O'Reilly and Gus Nyquist, but do still expect to see Forsberg back in the lineup tonight. Now, talking about, top line scoring doesn't mean to say that depth players aren't going to be key. They are going to be key. Obviously, we've seen what happens when you get scoring from depth players, but you're also going to need depth players, especially that fourth line. I loved their performance in Anaheim. They're going to need to be forechecking. They're going to need to be getting pucks, getting turnovers. Even players like Luke Evangelista, we've saw in kind of the end of this 5-game road stretch, he is really out there hunting pucks, winning puck battles. Going to need to see that from the depth players. Also, we need to see more of some Saros magic at home. Suspect Saros will get the start in net tonight. We'll see what Andrew Brunette plans, but regardless of whether it is Juuse Saros or Kevin Lankinen, goaltending is going to be key tonight. What could make this a trap game is if Nashville comes home and goes, whew, we are home now. We are in a wild card spot. We are doing okay. Can't exhale. There is no exhale moment tonight for the Nashville Predators. Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz had to click her heels together 3 times and say there's no place like home. Tonight, the Nashville Predators have to come to Bridgestone Arena with a mindset and click their skates together 3 times and say there is no place like Bridgestone Arena. And they have got to get the win tonight against the Ottawa Senators. Again, on tomorrow's show, we are going to talk about whatever we see happen in tonight's game against the Senators, including one word to describe the game. The rest of this week, we're going to preview the big games and again, talk about what is happening at this trade deadline. Anything could happen at any moment. Make sure you stay here and stay tuned with Locked On Predators. We're going to be covering all of the action on and off the ice this week. That's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We'll be back tomorrow after the game.